Welcome to Tuesday's edition of COVID-19. The daily tally remains little changed on the 500 level today, and authorities are reiterating calls for prompt testings to stem cluster infections amid a surge in the rate of untraceable infections in recent days. And speaking of surge, we take a look at the latest on the economy later on in the program. Here first is the broader pandemic coverage with our Kwon So-ah. Now, So-ah, just start us off then.
Sure, Sunny. For the second straight day, Korea posted less than 600 COVID-19 infections. 542 is the figure we're seeing as of 12 a.m., so that's 45 fewer cases than Monday. And both domestic and imported cases have seen a drop. But the average in daily domestic cases in the past week has risen to 616. Now, if we take a look at our graph now, it was last Wednesday when we saw the numbers suddenly surging to the 600s and even hitting 700. So although we are seeing this slight decline here due to more COVID-19 tests conducted on Monday and Tuesday than on the weekend, we might see another rise by tomorrow, so Wednesday. And Health Minister Gov'T, meantime, said this Tuesday that this week's development will be crucial in assessing whether the country is entering a fourth wave of infections. And if that happens, the magnitude of the outbreak will be larger than during the third wave, is what he warned. In the meantime, Korea now has a total of 110,688 infections with 1,775 fatalities. And infections are breaking out at daily settings across the country, including at gyms, during private gatherings, as well as an increase related to schools, is what the government has been saying today. And we're seeing triple digits here in Seoul and Gyeonggi-do province, as well as over 30 cases down in Busan and Ulsan. And let's also get an update on the vaccination front. So we had around 37,800 people who either received their first shot or second shot a day ago.
Right. Now, so globally and locally, vaccinations are not pushing down infection numbers. In fact, we're seeing alarming resurgences across the globe.
Yes, Sonia, unfortunately. So according to WHO Chief Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, the pandemic is far from over. Now, global COVID-19 infections have been rising for the 7th straight week after actually seeing a 6th straight consecutive weekly decline in January and February. Here's what the WHO chief said.
Last week was the fourth highest number of cases in a single week so far. Several countries in Asia and the Middle East have seen large increases in cases. This is despite the fact that more than 780 million doses of vaccine have now been administered globally.
Let's take a look at the global figures now. The U.S. is approaching 32 million infections, and also Turkey here is close to 4 million with over 54,000 infections reported in the past day. And the fastest rise is seen in India with some 160,000 cases reported in the span of 24 hours. Now, along with the rise in infections, the death toll, the global death toll also has been rising for the 4th straight week. Here we are seeing the 5 countries with the highest number of COVID-19 related fatalities, with over 576,000 in the U.S., followed by Brazil, and here Mexico, over 209,000 fatalities, although this country just has 2.28 million cases in total. And those, let's also take a look at the global figure in total here. 137.2 million is the figure we're seeing, with a similar rise in infections as on Monday. And those are the updates I have for now, but I'll see you back after the briefing. Sunny?
All right, so thank you for now. Right, back on the local front, efforts are underway to address global shortages in vaccine supplies. And for more on this, I have our Kim Ji-yeon here in the studio with me. Welcome, Ji-yeon.
Hello.
Right then, now here Korea has earmarked more aid for the development of homegrown COVID-19 vaccines. Tell us more.
Sure. Korea is injecting more than $61 million to help local biotech companies proceed with phase 3 clinical trials for their COVID-19 vaccine candidates during the latter half of this year. The Health Ministry, in a report to President Moon Jae-in on Monday, laid out plans to support clinical trials led by local firms SK Bioscience, EU Biologics, and Solid, Genexin, Jinwan Life Science. And the budget allocated this time around is a slight bumper compared to last year when the country invested $43.5 million on vaccine development. And the announcement comes on the heels of President Moon Jae-in's warning that the country may witness an explosive wave of COVID-19 infections. And his comments was made during an emergency interagency meeting held Monday amid growing fears that Korea may be on the brink of a fourth wave of coronavirus infections. President Moon said the most important task at the current junction is to locate asymptomatic and unidentified patients as the country pushes forward with its vaccination campaign. He also announced that vaccines from American firm Novavax will be available in Korea by the third quarter.
이달부터 노바백스 백신의 국내 생산이 시작되고 상반기 백신 생산에 필요한 원부자재도 확보했습니다. 6월부터 완제품이 출시되고 3분기까지 2천만여 분이 우리 국민들을 위해 공급될 예정입니다.
The president reaffirmed the government's zero-tolerance policy against violators of social distancing regulations. He also said the government will have no other choice but to further tighten restrictions, despite its toll on people's livelihoods, if the outbreak is not brought under control. And starting this week, Korea has mandated the wearing of face masks at all times when indoors, regardless of the social distancing level. Violators can face a fine of up to $90.
Right. Meanwhile, Chian, also on Monday, I hear authorities here shared some updates on their second quarter vaccination plan.
Sure, yes. The announcement by Korean health authorities comes amid concerns about the safety of the AstraZeneca vaccine. Investigations are underway in the UK and other European countries regarding possible links between the vaccine and very rare cases of unusual blood clots, and Korea is still withholding the use of AstraZeneca vaccines for its young citizens. And Korean authorities said they're considering a fast-track schedule of AstraZeneca vaccines for those aged between 60 and 64 to distribute them in the second quarter rather than the third quarter as initially planned. They'll be administered with surplus vaccines which have become available following the government's decision to suspend the AstraZeneca jab to those aged 30 or younger, estimated at around 640,000 people.
We will make our best efforts to minimize vaccine wastage by using special syringes that can draw extra doses and speed up our vaccination program. Starting Monday, we have also resumed the use of AstraZeneca vaccines for those aged over 30 based on our scientific evidence. Meanwhile, we'll be strengthening our monitoring and treatment strategy for unusual blood clots and other possible side effects.
The KDCA Commissioner added that Pfizer shots for people aged 75 or older will continue to roll out as planned this month. And on Monday, the distribution of AstraZeneca vaccines resumed in Korea for special education teachers, school nurses at kindergartens, elementary, and middle schools that are age 30 or older.
I see. All right. Chian, as always, thank you for that coverage.
Thank you.
Right, up next, we are poised to join the regular briefing on the COVID-19 situation here on the local front for this Tuesday. Now, while we wait for that to start, here are a few reminders about prevention efforts in the country. Free COVID-19 testings are now also available at all community health centers across the country. Prior to this, free screenings were only possible at temporary centers that had been set up to encourage preemptive testing among the public. Also, those who fail to adorn face masks while within indoor public settings will face fines of up to 100,000 won from this week, that is. And also those who violate the no eating regulation will be fined 100,000 won as well. Now, we are waiting for the briefing to start. We'll come back to you. Well, it's about to start. We'll come back to you afterwards.
First of all, we have Mr. Lee Sang-won with the explanation on the briefing. Let us now begin our regular briefing on the COVID-19 situation in South Korea for April 13th, Tuesday. As of today midnight, we have a total of 528 new local infections and 14 new imported cases. The total caseload now stands at 110,688. Yesterday, we had 91,469 tests being conducted at the makeshift testing centers in the metropolitan area. We carried out 43,733 tests, confirming 85 confirmed cases. And we also have 528 more people being discharged, while 7,581 still remain in quarantine undergoing treatment. And we have 2 less patients with critical or severe conditions, standing at 101. We had 5 additional fatalities. I extend my deepest condolences to the deceased and the members of the bereaved families. And as for the recent major cluster infections, please refer to the press kit that has been released to you earlier. And lately at the academies and also schools, we are seeing cluster infections, and we also would like to take particular precautions, and we would like to update you on possible risk factors. Starting from early April, in Daejeon, we also had about 97 confirmed cases centering around schools and private academies. And we see that one lecturer at an academy has had the suspected symptoms even at the late March. However, this person did not get tested, and therefore there was a delay in identifying possible cases. And as a result, we had 45 people being identified at the academies and 28 people being confirmed at schools and so forth. We believe that one of the largest risk factor of the virus transmission was the lack of face mask wearing, and we also saw the reasons of sharing food at community centers as well. And also in Jeonju as well, we also saw cluster infections stemming from an after-school teacher, and this had spread the virus to schools and other private academies, and until now we have 31 confirmed cases to date. And also the same for this case was there was about 6 days of interval between the first day of the clinical symptoms and the identification of the patient. So we would like to note that there were several days in the interval in identifying these patients. And moreover, during this process at academies and schools, there were primary transmissions which later spread to local transmissions at other schools and other private academies and family members. So we would like to ask all of the faculty members working at schools and private academies, as well as parents, to also ask you to refrain from going to schools or going to work if you have any clinical symptoms. And at schools, please also provide students with proper guidance to anti-virus prevention measures. And all of the students should also wear face masks properly when they are indoors at all times. They need to wash their hands on a regular basis and disinfect their hands on a regular basis as well. And they need to also be aware of self-hygiene. All of the teachers and faculty members at private academies and schools need to ventilate the space on a regular basis as well, and disinfect multi-touched areas as well. And lately, we have seen the topic of the self-test kit being risen as a very hot topic here in South Korea. This is one of the ways to identify the patients at an early pace. Therefore, we believe that the assessment for the accuracy will also need to be commenced, and also we need to think about the approval process of the usage and also the cost effectiveness. Of course, using these self-diagnostic test kits is very simple and very convenient. However, we also need to look at the effectiveness based on scientific evidence as well. Moreover, here are some updates on our COVID-19 vaccination here in South Korea. As of today midnight, we have 37,785 more people receiving their first dose of COVID-19 vaccine here in South Korea, with the total number standing at 1,195,342. And we have 25 more people receiving their second dose, with the number standing at 60,511. We have about 37,000 people getting their vaccinations as for the eligible group for Q2. And we have the vaccination rate standing at about 10.3% for the second Q recipients. And as for those over the age of 75 and also all of the residents and workers at the nursing hospitals above the age of 65 stand at above 200,000. And we also have many more people getting vaccinated at these specific facilities. And as for nursing hospitals and long-term care centers, we are seeing that the first dose vaccination rate stands at about 62 and 69% respectively. And by facilities, we also have about 89% at the nursing hospitals, and about 83% of the first responders are getting their vaccinations of the first dose of the vaccines. And at the COVID-19 treatment hospitals, we are undergoing the second dose administrations, and about 94.4% have completed their second dose administration. And we also have 109 new cases of adverse responses, and the total number stands at 11,735. And among them, 11,546 are mild and common symptoms after inoculation, including muscle pain, headache, and light fever. And we have 114 suspected cases of anaphylaxis, 27 suspected cases of severe cases, and 48 cases of deaths have been reported so far. Globally, we are seeing a 7-week rise in the number of daily tallies, and we are seeing a major resurgence of the virus internationally. We have seen a peak of the virus at late last year, that is, and we have also seen a major increase of the virus infections lately, and globally we are also very much concerned about the spread of the new variants. Here in South Korea, we see a first index case has also, if this person has got tested out immediately after showing symptoms, we could have prevented the spread of the virus. So we ask you to also get tested if you had any symptoms like coughing, fever, or other respiratory symptoms, or loss of taste or smell. So please do not go to work or school, but get tested as soon as possible. You shall never visit the public use facilities if you have such clinical symptoms. Moreover, before you have the results of the testing, please refrain from going outdoors, and please refrain from going to the multi-use facilities as well as your workplace. Please note that this infectious disease could be infectious to all of us, and we note that this could infect any one of us, anyone of the public. So if you have any clinical symptoms, please go directly to the clinical center to get tested as soon as possible. Starting from yesterday, we have rolled out the vaccinations for the faculty members and nurses at the schools and preschools. We will cooperate with the related ministries to decrease the number of infections at campuses and schools. Until we reach herd immunity, we believe that quarantine measures is crucial, and it is very important that we practice these measures. And the quarantine authorities will also make sure that we exert our full efforts to carry out the vaccinations in full-fledged and prevent the spread of the virus to a large extent. Thank you very much.
Right, there was Lee Sang-won with Tuesday's afternoon briefing. So what did he have to say?
Well, first he mentioned the increase in infections related to educational facilities. For instance, in the city of Daejeon, there was one cluster infection with almost 100 cases that was linked to a number of high schools as well as cram schools. So he said the first person who was believed to have infected the other people, was a teacher at a cram school who went to work despite showing symptoms. So with that, he stressed that any faculty member or students who show COVID-19-like symptoms should not go to school or other venues and get tested for the virus. He also said that improper wearing of face masks as well as eating together were some of the reasons for these spreads at educational facilities. He also had some words regarding the self-testing kits that are receiving a lot of attention these days. He said despite being less accurate than the conventional tests, it has benefits when it comes to convenience. So that's why accurate and strict, thorough review as well as approval is needed.
All right, so thank you for that.
My pleasure.
Right now, there are some 70 COVID-19 vaccination centers across the country. And aside from the medical personnel trained with the task of inoculation, there are volunteers on site dedicated to providing much needed assistance. We have more on their efforts in this report.
This is a COVID-19 vaccination center in northeastern Seoul that opened its doors on April 1st. The medical staff and vaccination workers here spend a great deal of time preparing every morning at the crack of dawn, before the center starts welcoming visitors at 9 a.m. With around 27,000 residents here in Seoul's Nowon-gu district having given their consent to get vaccinated, the district must inoculate at least 400 people a day to meet its targeted timeline. The district has recruited many volunteers to help out with its vaccination efforts.
올해 이제 백신 접종이 시작되면서 많은 도움의 손길이 좀 필요해서 우리 행정 인력으로는 굉장히 부족한 부분이 많았습니다. 그래서 저희가 안내를 했는데 안내한 한 20분 만에 100여 명의 백신 의병단들이 모이셔서 뜨거운 열기를 보여주셨고요. 우리 백신 의병단들은 예방접종센터에서 각종 안내, 그리고 문진표 작성, 그다음에 사후 관찰 모니터링 이런 부분들을 도와주는 그런 역할을 하시게 되는데요.
Volunteer workers are called into action as soon as the first visitor steps through the doors of the vaccination center.
신분증 가져오셨어요? 그거 지금 꺼내셔야 돼서 준비해 주세요. 저기 가서 번호표를 뽑아드려야 돼가지고 이게 필요해요. 이렇게 쭉 갈 거예요. 저기 앞에까지. 천천히. 11시 40분 시간이에요.
Many elderly citizens often struggle with the task of filling out basic health questionnaires due to poor vision and other challenges. This is also where volunteer workers step in to provide vital assistance.
지금 드시고 계시는 약은 뭐 있나요?
혈압약은 아침에 하나만 먹고 왔는데 딴 건 안 먹고.
혈압약.
네, 그것만 하루 먹고.
그리고 어머니 저희가 왜냐하면 여기 약 속에 혈액 응고제가 들어있는지 없는지 잘 모르기 때문에 요 2층에 올라가시면 의사 선생님이 계세요. 그럼 그분한테 다시 한 번 더 말씀해 주세요.
봉사자분들이 친절하게 잘해주셔가지고 백신 접종 안전하게 받고 잘 갈 수 있을 것 같습니다.
봉사자분들이 친절하게 잘해주셔서 감사합니다.
Those who've just been vaccinated must stay on the premises for 15 minutes in case of any side effects, with volunteer workers keeping by their sides with a watchful eye.
어르신 괜찮으세요?
네, 아무렇지도 않아요.
아무렇지도 않으세요? 집에 가셔서 건강 잘 챙기세요. 휴식 잘 취하시고요.
나가지 말고.
예, 오늘은 푹 쉬세요. 이따가 천천히 가세요. 네.
The volunteer workers have lifted a heavy burden off the shoulders of the medical workers here.
환자분들을 대기 장소에서 접종 장소까지 안내하고 그다음에 이상 반응 관찰하는 동안 지켜봐 주실 분이 필요한데 저를 비롯한 많은 의료진들이 이런 자원봉사자분들께 많은 도움을 받고 있습니다.
The volunteers are also tasked with making phone calls to confirm vaccine appointments and remind people of their vaccination dates.
4월 13일 오후 3시인데 알고 계시는 시간 맞으세요? 예, 위치는 노원 군인체육센터고요. 어머니 가실 때 신분증 꼭 지참해 주시면 감사하겠습니다.
It's now 4 p.m. and the vaccination center is closing for the day. With the help of 30 volunteer workers, the center inoculated a total of 463 people today.
보호자분이랑 같이 동행하시는 경우도 많은데 그렇지 않은 어르신들께서는 많이 힘들어하세요. 근데 이제 그런 어르신들을 직접 하나하나 차근차근 같이 하는 과정에서 가장 보람을 느꼈습니다.
코로나 백신 빨리 맞아서 우리 국민 모두 건강하게 생활하였으면 좋겠습니다.
너무 걱정하지 마시고 백신 예방 접종하러 오시면 우리나라의 코로나19가 얼른 종결될 것 같습니다. 어머니들, 아버님들 걱정하지 말고 오세요.
These volunteer workers are a testament to the power that ordinary people can bring to bear in moving the country's vaccination campaign forward.
Thanks to the ingenuity of the scientific community, hundreds and millions of people are being vaccinated, and this is expected to power recoveries in many countries later this year.
자율차, 전기차 확산에 따라 반도체 수요가 더욱 증가할 것으로 전망되므로 차량용 핵심 반도체를 자립화할 필요가 있습니다.
Amid much attention on the impact of vaccinations on the global economy, Korea has been found to have fared relatively better than its global counterparts. It has re-entered the list of top 10 economies, and its stock markets have been rallying in recent days. I have Professor Kim Se-hwan from Ewha Women's University. Good to see you again, Professor Kim.
Thank you for having me on your program.
And I also have joining this session virtually is Daniel Yu, the head of global investment at Yuanta Securities Korea. Pleasure to see you again, Mr. Yu.
Good afternoon.
Right then, Professor Kim, the International Monetary Fund has forecast a 6% growth for the global economy this year, despite the pandemic. What is fueling this optimistic outlook?
In April's economic growth forecast, IMF raised the global economic growth to 6% from previous 5.5%. So that means global economy is likely to expand at the fastest pace in last four decades. There are two major reasons behind this strong economic growth. The first is, particularly between advanced countries like US and UK, vaccination is accelerating. In the case of the United States, almost a third of population is vaccinated. And secondly, major economies, including US and Korea, are providing more aggressive stimulus packages, like United States, 1.9 trillion plus 3 trillion stimulus packages. In April's economic growth forecast, IMF forecasted this year's Korean economic growth to 3.6%, which is higher than government's forecast and Bank of Korea's forecast.
I see. And speaking of Korea, Professor Kim, Korea has reclaimed the 10th position among global economies in 2020, and its per capita GDP surpassed that of Italy last year amid the pandemic, for the first time, that is. What do these findings tell us?
Well, in terms of GDP size, before the pandemic, Korea was about 12th largest economy in the global economy. Actually, Korean economy GDP was slightly larger than that of the Spain's GDP and slightly smaller than Italian GDP before the pandemic. But over the pandemic, Korean economy shrank by 1% in last year, which is one of the best performance except China. But unfortunately, Italian economy shrank by 9%. So as of now, Korean GDP is slightly larger than that of Italian GDP at about 1.6 trillion US dollars.
I see. And staying with a positive tone, Mr. Yu, the Kosdaq closed above 1,000 this past Monday for the first time in more than 2 decades amid COVID-19. What was behind the rally, in your view?
Right, as you said, Korean economy is becoming the number 10 size,
And accordingly, if you look at KOSPI as well as KOSDAQ, the earnings growth rates were significant for the both market. If you look at the KOSDAQ, you're looking at earnings growth rate of about 28.8% this year on consensus. And next year, it is expected to grow another 19%. And it is trading at PER of 24 times and 18 times for the next year, which is clearly much bigger discount than NASDAQ P multiples. I think that if you look at the KOSDAQ market, you are seeing upgrade of the bio-related sector in terms of the earnings growth rate after the COVID-19 incident. And not just that, you are seeing game and contents industry showing a very strong earnings growth rate, and the market cap size are rising on that as well. It is not just applied to KOSDAQ, it is applied to KOSPI as well. And the KOSPI seems to be the leading market relative to any global market if you look at since the COVID-19 incident in March of last year. And from the bottom to the top, KOSPI has risen by over 127%.
I see. And staying with the KOSPI then, Mr. Yu, what are your prospects for this year for the main market?
The main market actually is looking even better than just the KOSDAQ. As I said, the KOSDAQ is expected to show 28% growth of earnings this year. But if you look at KOSPI, it's even greater. You're looking at 34% earnings growth rate, and even the P multiple is even lower at only 14 times. And going into the next year, you're looking at 19% earnings growth rate again for 2022, and the P multiple of only 12 times. That is a significant discount. The main reason for that is because you already know that there's a very strong growth in the chip business, the semiconductor business, as well as electric car businesses. And we are seeing a very strong numbers in terms of the export side as well. So all in all, it is based on fundamental improvement relative to any other economies.
I see. Now, also on the economic front, Professor Kim, I believe US President Joe Biden addressed the current global semiconductor shortage with heads of related businesses virtually this past Monday. First then, why are semiconductors in short supply this year?
A very unique feature of global semiconductor market is there is huge ups and downs in demand and supply and even price. In the last 30 years, we saw like a 20% price increase in a year and another 20% price decrease in a single year. So this is fundamental reason why there have been lots of chicken games like bankruptcies and mergers between chip manufacturers in the last 30 years. Over the pandemic, most of the chip manufacturers expected there will be huge decrease of chip demand in the global market, which was not correct. But there was unexpected explosion of demand for chips because of a stronger demand for smartphones and notebooks and online businesses. So that stronger demand, which was unexpected, caused something unprecedented shortages of chip in every single industries from automobile to electronics. And in addition, there was extraordinarily cold wave in the United States, and fire damages in Japanese chip manufacturers' production facilities even worsened global production capacity.
I see. And before we delve further into that, Mr. Yu, among the global companies invited to the virtual meeting on Monday, hosted by US President Biden, that I mentioned earlier, was Samsung Electronics. What can you tell us about this meeting, Mr. Yu?
Well, obviously, if you look at the semiconductor industry, it is showing a biggest flourishing aspect of it. Clearly, there is a huge shortage. And as far as the memory business is concerned, Korea is the #1 in terms of the market share. Obviously, Samsung Electronics plus the SK Hynix consist of 75% of the market share for the DRAM side. And if you look at the LAN side, it is about over 50%. But clearly, Korea is the biggest part for the memory businesses. Of course, the semiconductor business is not just the memory. You are looking at the fabless as well as the foundry businesses. But all in all, you are seeing a huge improvement and demand for the chip side as well as overall semiconductor demand. And Samsung Electronics being there obviously would be quite a big discussion in terms of how to provide supplies to the U.S., particularly related to the automobile side, because there's clearly the automobiles of tomorrow requires a lot more semiconductors than before. Some estimates it's more than 10 times more. And as you know, that there's automated cars and the electric cars, and there will be continuous significant demand. So Samsung Electronics, and not just Korea Samsung Electronics, but also the foundry business, TSMC of the Taiwan, will clearly have some kind of directions to provide ample supplies chains to the U.S. car makers and also data centers and all these so-called fourth industrial revolution related sectors.
Right. Now, Professor Kim, as Mr. Yu has just mentioned, semiconductors account for 20% of Korea's exports, and Samsung Electronics, along with Taiwan's TSMC, they lead the semiconductor manufacturing market across the globe, that is.
Right.
Why are we being affected then?
Well, actually, even though Korean economy is well known for its top-notch chip production technology, unfortunately, Korean chip manufacturers do not much produce automobile chips. So because of these Korean automobile producers like Hyundai Motors, which is fifth largest automaker in the global market, imports almost 100% of automobile chips from foreign companies. The chip manufacturers like Samsung Electronics and SK Hynix covers 60% of global memory chip market, as Mr. Yu pointed out. But these companies are not much interested in producing automobile chips because that requires low-level technology in production, and that is less profitable than that of memory chip business. So Samsung Electronics and SK Hynix covers only really tiny part of, like 2% of the global automobile chip market.
I see. So the chips we're talking about are the ones that are being used for cars, would be rear view cameras or infotainment systems and electric cars, as Mr. Yu pointed out then.
Exactly.
I
exactly.
See. Okay. Mr. Yu, do tell us a bit more about the impact of the global semiconductor crunch.
Well, I think that you got to look at the big picture. There's clearly a very significant demand improvement, not just for the automobiles, but the global economy as a whole for semiconductor businesses. I don't know whether you heard about Moore's law, which is indicating that every 2 years, the semiconductor demand doubles. And I think the speed of this exponential growth of the semiconductor demand is actually accelerating because you are seeing a very significant demand increases on not just the automobile industries, but as you said, the handsets and also the major data centers. We are talking about fourth industrial revolution's era. And because of that, all is related to data crunching and data mining. And that creates the supercomputers, I guess everybody's talking about going to the moon, going to the Mars. And all this is related to a significant demand for the semiconductor businesses. So the shortage, yes, it is causing some problems in the short period, but I think it's great the fact that there's a very, very strong growth of demand and that Korea has the biggest market share in terms of the memory side. The question mark is that whether or not Korea will be able to enter the foundry business, just like the Taiwan's TSMC, and Samsung Electronics do have a 2-digit market share, but we do think that there will be more investment will be made and we will start to gain more market share. And if that happens, we think that Korea will not just stop at the 10th largest economy, but it can even go higher in terms of or I guess smaller in terms of numbers. So probably some are saying that Korea might even enter top 7 over the next 5 years.
I see. Now, keeping in mind what Mr. Yu has said, Professor Kim, how is Korea planning to tackle this challenge and perhaps to enter the G7 as, well, the top 7 economies across the globe with semiconductor manufacturing?
Well, as Mr. Liu pointed out, semiconductor became extremely important in future economy and industry. We say that the country that occupy semiconductor industry in advance will dominate the future economy. It means that the future industries like artificial intelligence, 3D printer, and Internet of Things are based on more powerful semiconductors. And in the past, we remember that really incredible, successful story of Korean chip industry has been generated by government's massive support and very effective strategy. But recently, there has been no intervention of Korean government on promoting chip industry because I think partially it is related to these two main manufacturers, Samsung Electronics and SK Hynix, represents the chaebol companies in Korea. So since semiconductor industry became much more important than before, I think it is time to redesign government strategy on promoting semiconductor industry.
I see. And against that backdrop, Professor Kim, how would a possible fourth wave affect Korea's economy?
Well, as President Moon's Korean New Deal pursues, the first wave industry is the only choice for Korean economy to be more developed because Korean economy is already high-tech based, and Korean companies and economy is really competitive in IT industry and basic manufacturing. So I think that's the only choice for going for fourth wave related industries, only choice for Korean economic development.
I see. And broadly speaking, Mr. Yu, what is your forecast for the global stock market amid efforts to rein in this latest resurgence across the globe?
Well, I think that if you look at this fourth wave of the COVID-19, this is not the really major concern because the vaccine, whether or not it will be successful, is already given that it will become successful in the future. Now, having said that, I think the economies are moving in very different directions. The growth rate of the industry that you are seeing is the fourth industrial revolution related sectors, including semiconductor business, and also the biotech side and the alternative energies. And all these sectors are moving very fast and showing a significant improvement. And that results into a very timid inflationary pressure for the global economies. So if this continues, we think that the equity market for not just Korea, but globally will show continued rise in 2 digits for this year. We are estimating that S&P 500 will reach 4,400 and the NASDAQ will reach 15,000 and Kospi to reach 3,500 by the end of the year.
I see. All right, Mr. Yu, thank you very much for your thoughts and your time. And Professor Kim, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you very much.
Right, now while we wait for vaccinations to gear the global economy onto a path of recovery, social distancing remains a tangible defense against COVID-19. So do seek to take care. Thank you for watching.